Oh, it's not working. Oh, now it's working. Frightened myself. As I was saying, we're going to kick off this afternoon's session with planning for the future, demand-side narratives and scenarios. And this session is being held in partnership with the Stockholm Environment Institute. If you want to attend the session on modernising power grids for a renewable future, you actually need to go to the Kammeher Grand, because that's in the other room. So this first session is for the Innovation in Infrastructure for Tripling Renewables track. And in this session, we're going to highlight the value of advanced approaches to planning this transition. We talked about the importance of planning this morning, and I think that's going to play a critical role in how we build out what we need to see. The session is going to highlight insights from a diverse set of experts, approaching demand-side planning from a range of different perspectives, socio-economic, technological, and behavioural, and with diverse approaches, which in this case really means looking at participatory processes. So the idea is this session is going to give you some thoughts and fresh ideas on how you can contribute to more robust long-term planning within your own sectors and countries. Now, one of the key things for this session is the Slido. So if you have questions, if you could just just click on the QR code and put your questions in, that would be marvelous. Now, to get you thinking about these issues, we're going to have two scene-setting presentations. The first of these is from Nadim Gussos, who is the Associate Programme Officer at IRENA. He works in the team leading the global network on long-term energy scenarios.
Thank you very much, Felicia, and thank you for everyone for attending, and welcome to this session. So my name is Nadim Gussos. I'm an Associate Program Officer in the Energy Planning team at IRENA, and we're very pleased to have you here. And we're actually very excited to have this session so early in the agenda, because demand-side planning really sets the foundation for many of the topics we'll be discussing this week. So whether it's grid modernization, AI and data center, energy consumption, energy communities, or many of the other sessions, energy demand really plays into all of that. So the topics are really linked with how we consume energy. And to meet our targets of tripling renewables by 2030, it's really important to understand not just how this energy will be supplied, but also how it will be consumed, and critically as well, the interactions between supply and demand, and how different stakeholders envision these different futures. So getting demand planning right really affects a whole range of policies. So from regulatory frameworks, investment in infrastructure, climate commitments, which is why it's such a priority for national governments. And this is the main topic we're addressing in the Long-Term Energy Scenarios Network, or the LTES network for short. So this network, which is coordinated by IRENA, is a global platform for energy planning experts from countries and technical institutions to share experiences and best practices around long-term energy planning for the clean energy transition. So you can see here we have 31 country members and 15 technical partners at the moment. And really the LTES network helps government institutions answer critical policy questions directly by sharing these practices and how the different planning approaches work in real-world policy settings. So we explore what countries are doing in their energy planning processes, as shown in this framework we have. So whether it's in the energy modeling tools and in the initial phases, let's say, developing and using the long-term energy scenarios, or using those scenarios for policymaking. As you can see, they're all interconnected. There's different bidirectional relationships between them. But also, it's very important to understand how they, in these different phases, we're engaging with the different stakeholders. So you can see there's a bit of our categorization for some of the stakeholders that are engaged in these planning processes. So we do this through many different high-level engagements, but also technical workshops and dialogues with countries, with experts around the world. And then we try to capture this information, all the learnings, all the experiences in different methods. So we have reports, we have dashboards, for example, and different methods of dissemination. So we try to share this knowledge further. And what makes this network unique is it's really driven by its members and partners. So the priorities are really set by this heavy engagement that we hold with the members and partners. And as you can see, for example, here in our last annual priority survey, demand side aspects ranked second. So just after energy security and geopolitics. So this is, energy security is what everyone's talking about for good reason, of course, but demand side was not far from that. And this really highlights how national governments are placing this and prioritizing this topic, and not just this year, actually. We've seen this trend over the past years, but it's really, the different ways of approaching this topic are really coming to fore in the past year. So this network has been running through since 2018. And we've seen many different changes, let's say, in how these topics are discussed. So before, maybe to put it simply, demand was seen as a more static process. Planning for demand was seen as more static rather than dynamic. So the focus of it was maybe demand being a function of population growth and some technology cost and performances. So you try to project what those will look like, and this is kind of your input to your long-term plans. It was done with in silos as well, and so it was a lot of it was population-driven as well. And what we're seeing now is a different approach. So there's more whole system integration. There's more deep dives into different sectors that play a key role in energy consumption demand. There's a much bigger or broader socio-technical view. So demand planning, or demand in general, is not only shaped by the technology or the growth of a population, but also behavior, consumption, choices, and even values. Those all affect how we, and how businesses, how communities, how people consume energy. So it means the area of demand planning has gotten a lot more interdisciplinary as well. And finally, it's also a lot more dynamic. So throughout these days, we'll also be discussing a lot of the innovations that make this dynamic. So whether it's demand response, peer-to-peer trading, consumers becoming prosumers, or so on, it means demand is not just a linear, let's say, a projection, but rather it can be very dynamic and depend on a lot of things and interactions between stakeholders. And this means there's multiple pathways around demand, and not just supply, but multiple pathways around demand that you can that are being looked at. So multiple ways of envisioning these futures as well. So as we have all these wider range of pathways that stakeholders have of what the future of demand looks like, and increasingly complex but interesting ways of approaching these questions through both technical and participatory approaches. And today we're very lucky to have a set of experts that can tackle these topics from very different perspectives and help us identify the near-term actions that we need in order to approach these long-term challenges and targets. So with that, I'll end my presentation. I'll let Dr. Charlie Heaps from our partner institution, Stockholm Environment Institute, to dive a bit deeper into the topic. And the Stockholm Environment Institution, as you said, is the partner organization, but it's also a technical partner of the LTES network. So we're very happy to have them here. So thank you very much, Charlie.
Thanks, Nadim. I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what you said, but I may touch on some similar points. So this morning I had this slight sort of imposter syndrome feeling of, we're going to be talking, we're here with IRENA. IRENA is about renewables. It's about the supply side. And this session, we're going to talk more about the demand side. So, which I think is interesting that we're turning now to sort of other aspects of demand planning. So just to set the scene a little bit, there's different ways of thinking about demand. And one thing I want to stress that I think we're going to try and do in this session is there's the sort of the more short-term aspects and the longer-term aspects of demand. And we're not going to focus so much on the short-term aspects. So, there's very interesting discussions to be had about, how best to forecast demand in the very short term. particularly if you're from a utility, that's a topic of great concern to you. But we're going to think, sort of step back a bit and think a bit more about the long term. And I think when you're thinking about the long term, it's not just a forecasting exercise that you're doing. You know, it's not just a sort of you're not sort of thinking fatalistically about what will the demand be in the future. You're thinking more about scenarios. You're thinking about what do you want the demand to be in the future. There's a quote that I quite like, which is, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And that's a little bit about what we're going to consider here, I think, in this session. So with that said, let's sort of think about some of these, just do a little bit of scene setting on some of the topics about why we think it's important to talk about demand. So I realise I'm not tall enough to actually see the screen here. So maybe one reason that the demand sector has come more into focus is I think the world is changing very rapidly, and we have to take that into account now. So maybe in the past it was okay to take this more fatalistic approach of predicting the demand and forecasting the demand. You know, in the past we had slow, stable growth in most markets for most energy markets. And we had quite predictable patterns of demand as well, whether it's seasonal or diurnal. That's all changing now. You know, there's some big factors coming in. We've got rapidly growing populations, so there's sort of a burgeoning demand for growth. We've got new sectors coming in. We've already talked quite a bit about AI. We're not going to go into that in a lot of detail in this session, but it's certainly, there's, you know, whole new demand sectors emerging, which are incredibly difficult to predict, so that's something to think about. But there's also these sort of new imperatives that the world is taking on board. So there's the imperative of dealing with climate change, which has obviously really upended what we think energy systems need to look like for the future. So, you know, we're in the process, every country is in the process of redesigning its energy systems to account for these big challenges, not just of climate change, but also sort of the development challenges, ensuring access to energy. And that's causing a lot of uncertainty. And then because of these changes, there's these sort of increasing interactions between demand and supply. So, for example, if you're thinking of doing lots of policies on energy efficiency as a way of sort of, you know, trying to sort of electrify a lot of the sectors to make them work well with the supply side and renewables, that's causing a lot of uncertainty, right? So, you know, if we do, in a lot of countries, the peak demand in the future is going to be heavily driven by air conditioners. And, you know, if you've got a lot of policies that look at energy efficient air conditioners, that's going to change the shape of your electrical load. So that's something that you really need to think much more in detail about the demand side. So as I say, I think I've jumped ahead a little bit here, sorry. So there's the structure of energy demand is really changing rapidly. Oops, sorry, I'm knocking things on the ground. We've got these climate goals, we've got the surge in renewable energy, but also associated technologies like battery electric vehicles, heat pumps, AI. We've got these big challenges coming of uncertainty about AI demand. We've got rapid pressure to meet decarbonisation goals. And then, of course, there's another big unknown is sort of smart energy systems. To what extent are those going to be, to what extent is the demand going to be controllable in the future? And kind of if you think about all of those things together, there's this sort of new paradigm emerging where, you know, the older paradigm was the supply needs to adjust to meet variable demand. But in the future, I think we're sort of beginning to move towards this new paradigm of the demand needing to adapt to sort of variable supply. So another really important issue is sort of connecting energy and financial planning. So, you know, we've seen a lot of studies already that suggest that renewable energy can be very cost effective. And certainly in the near future, it will be extremely cost effective. But we have to remember also that by its nature, renewable energy and energy efficiency are highly capital intensive. So, just knowing that something has the lowest net present value, it only gets you so far, right? You need to think about how are you going to finance that. And that's difficult enough on the supply side when thinking about renewables. But I would say it's probably even more difficult on the demand side because you've got a lot sort of more heterogeneous demands. The technologies look different in each sector. Thinking about how you're going to have a plan to finance that shift to a more capital-intensive set of technologies on the demand side is a really pressing agenda. And there's really this sort of gap now in the planning. So the planning processes need to evolve to take into account some of these things. So I'd say there's a gap in terms of data. There isn't good data available, particularly on the demand side, to help planners think through these topics and to think about which technologies make sense. Where there is good data, quite often it's proprietary on the demand side, particularly in a lot of industrial data is very proprietary. And we need access to that so that we can plan systems and think about what systems make sense. And maybe AI is a particularly difficult example of that. We're really planning in the dark here, not knowing really what are the energy consumption, what are the energy demands associated with AI systems. So that's a really pressing demand. And I think a lot of countries are struggling with, the extent to which they want to sort of regulate systems to make data more available, but worrying about, if that is going to impinge on these industries that they want to be sort of national champions and be competitive, and they want to protect their competitive advantage. So that's a very difficult challenge. The modelling needs to be upgraded. The modelling on the demand side, I think, is particularly weak. A lot of advances in modelling have been on the supply side, but we need better methods. I've been told by Nadim that we mustn't talk too much about modelling, but that's my thing. So, but I promise we won't go into that into too much detail. And then it's not just the modelling, but it's also the need for coordination. So a lot of these things you need now to think about the demand and supply side together. And that's difficult. It's not just difficult from a modelling perspective, but it's difficult from a coordination perspective. You need to get different ministries involved. It's not enough just to have the electricity utility think about the future now. Now you need interministerial coordination. You need the transport ministry to be saying what they're doing on EVs, and you need to coordinate that with your RE plans, and you need, basically every ministry needs to be involved. Okay, how are we doing? And let me just say, particularly difficult challenges in low-income developing countries. For a start, there's much more rapid growth, but also energy systems in developing countries have traditionally been used as a vehicle for social policy, particularly in the electric sector. Many countries have sort of cross-subsidized electricity to try and make it more accessible to poorer members of society. And that's kind of in jeopardy now. With renewable energy is great in many ways, but in some ways it creates challenges for how you're going to manage that. There's behind-the-meter renewables being picked up very rapidly in a lot of industries and a lot of households. That's really causing challenges for grids. They're sort of starved of investment. There's a rather dramatic headline there I picked up from a recent Economist article, which maybe is overly dramatic, but I'd like to hear what people think. But for sure, it's a big challenge. So there, I think, in terms of planning, we need to think about what's the right role for centralized grids, what's the right role for more decentralized systems. And I know we have some panelists who are going to talk about that a little bit. So putting all these pieces together, there's clearly a pressing need for integrated resource planning, or sometimes it's called IRP, an extra R for sort of resilient resource planning. So there's clearly a need for this more coordinated approach, but we have to be mindful that there's challenges associated with that. So, to do more complicated planning requires more expertise, it requires more data. But it also requires convincing more stakeholders and getting more stakeholders involved in the process. So how do you go about doing that? You know, what's a reasonably efficient way of actually sort of identifying, you know, visions for where you want your energy systems for your country? You know, where do you want them to head in the future? How are you going to meet your climate targets? But do it in such a way that, you know, you've got lots of stakeholders involved. Yeah, and so I think I've covered that one. So I think, you know, there's this challenge over data, there's a challenge over expertise, but there's really this challenge over the governance and the coordination of those systems. Okay, so that's enough from me, I think. So I'd like to invite the panelists on stage now. Are you going to do that bit? I'm going to do that bit. Okay, so panelists, if you'd like to come up on stage. So we have a great panel today who are going to be able to talk about these issues from a number of different dimensions. We've got a lot of rich experience from China. Would you guys like to come up on stage now? Yeah, I don't think it matters. And I'm just going to introduce you in order on the slides. So we have Marina Sevilla from ECLAC, from the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. We have my colleague Fiona Lambe from the Stockholm Environment Institute. We have Yichun Gong from the State Grid Energy Research Institute in China. And we have Xiang from the National Energy Agency in China. So welcome and thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. And the way we're going to do this now is I'm going to give each of you a chance to give an initial, give your thoughts initially for about 6 minutes each. And then I will come back to you with some questions after that. And please, people in the audience, as you're listening, please use the Slido. And if you've got questions or comments or provocations, please give us those in the Slido. And we'll try and take as many of those as we can after the initial provocations and after the initial questions. So maybe I can just go in order. Fiona, would you like to start?
Yes, thanks, Charlie. And thanks for great framing slides there at the beginning. Thank you very much to IRENA for having me on this panel. It's really nice to be here. Really nice also to see quite a few women on the panel. I think that's really appreciated. So yeah, my name is Fiona Lambe. I'm a senior research fellow at Stockholm Environment Institute based in Stockholm, in Sweden. And my background is in design. And I'll say a little bit more about that later and during the panel. I've been working in energy access and energy transition, in particular with a focus on East Africa for the past, 20 years in different ways, in research and as a consultant. And in recent years, I've been focusing on something called service design, which we'll also talk a little bit about shortly. But in a nutshell, design, the field of design is extremely useful for understanding and planning for complex processes and complex transitions. So I think it's very relevant for this field. So my work has focused, like I said, on the design of energy services, quite a lot in low and middle income countries. But I started my career in decentralized energy in East Africa, energy access in really hard to reach places, in rural areas, in refugee camps, IDP camps, in informal settlements, and so on. I guess my niche when I got started in this field was on the socio-economic side of things. So really understanding the socio-economic aspects of household energy access. How do people use household energy? What do they do in their homes? What can they afford to pay for different fuels, for different types of energy services? What role does gender play in all of this? And so on. And I saw again and again failures in how energy services are designed, where user needs and behaviors are completely sort of left out of the picture. where energy technologies and services and programs, there's just a mismatch with people's needs and their contexts. And this has real consequences for people on the receiving end of energy services and programs, and not to mention all of the investment and resources, public and private funding that can go to waste when these things fail to take off. So through this work, I started to realize how critically important it is that we get a better grip on household level behavior, decision making, and even the socio-political economy aspects of energy transitions, which is integrally connected to just transitions. And I think I heard the term just transitions mentioned once this morning in the opening sessions, which I found a little bit surprising, but I think these behavioral aspects are really central to that, and understanding user needs and so on are central to doing, to transitioning energy in a way that is just and equitable. So for the past 10 years, my work has really zoomed in a lot on developing methods that can get to this granular, local information about people's behavior, what they do, what they need, and then how to feed this into the design of viable, scalable energy services. So like I said, using service design, which is a branch of the wider field of design, I and colleagues have been developing methods for mapping experiences and behaviors, journeys, we sometimes call them, of energy users, often households, but not only, with new services and technologies. And these mapping tools rely on quite a lot of qualitative data, but not only, gathered in context about energy service usage over time. And this is also really important. It's dynamic, it's not static, it changes as people are using a service. People's needs shift and change as well. So from the introduction of something new to the process of getting to know a service, to using it regularly, and everything that entails, from paying your bills, engaging with repairs, dealing with customer service, everything else along the way. These methods can help us to identify issues with newly designed services early on. It can help identify different types of users. It's not a one-size-fits-all, as I think anyone who's worked with energy services knows very well, but how do you actually design and tailor things that can meet the needs of different user archetypes, we often call them. Doing this very close design work with households and communities early on also allows you the opportunity to recognize and identify opportunities for households and communities to be a part of the energy services, to be employed and really get embedded in the energy services and benefit, not just be on the receiving end of them. So we've done this work with renewable mini-grids, for example, with clean cooking services in Kenya, in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, and Zambia. So I would be very happy to share our findings and share papers with anyone who's interested in that. And more recently, we've been getting into more private sector challenges. So how do SMEs working, for example, with mini-grids navigate risk, uncertainty, political economy challenges, regulatory risks when they're setting up their developments in these hard-to-reach places, and at the same time deliver high-quality services to their users? I won't tell me if I'm going on too long now, Charlie. Yep, I'll keep going. So I think colleagues and I have been really interested in how SMEs in different parts of East Africa have been managing in these very difficult, like I said, managing these difficult challenges. And at the same time, there seems to be quite many of them who are succeeding and seem to be doing well. So we've been scratching our heads and wondering, why is that? What is it that they're doing? What is it about their business model that allows them to be sort of resilient and manage these challenges? So a couple of recent studies we've done has been looking into that. And I think one of the key things that was really interesting is that to succeed and do well with mini-grids, renewable mini-grids, in low-income areas that are really sort of off the grid, in order to make these things viable, you need to have productive use of energy, ideally in the daytime. And this can be This can be very difficult and very challenging if that doesn't already exist. So what many companies seem to be doing at the moment is, alongside their mini-grid developments, they're starting up small businesses to try to boost local demand, to try to boost productive use of energy. And that can go in different ways, as we saw in some of our studies, that it can be very innovative, it can generate employment, but it can also distract businesses from their core service delivery, from their core value proposition to their customers. So that was just sort of an interesting insight. And we also saw that companies operating in areas where there's already a little bit of economic activity happening tend to see fairly quickly an upward kind of virtuous cycle when the mini-grid electricity comes to the community. And this sounds very obvious, but I think there's work to be done to try to bake that into energy planning. So how can we get better at identifying these areas, these communities where there's a little bit already happening, a little bit of economic activity bubbling, but the introduction of a mini-grid can really boost that. And very rapidly, you see this uptick where people are using, demand is increasing, people expand their businesses, and it becomes very, very viable. So I find these examples really very inspiring. So I think that's one of my questions for today. How do we get better at predicting future growth in these hard-to-reach areas after a mini-grid is installed and is up and running? But yeah, I have lots of other things to say, and I will...
I'm going to come back to you on some of those afterwards, so thank you very much.
And, yeah.
I'm really glad I started with you, because I think it's nice to see, it's nice for us to remember that, you know, the demand side, well, why do I love working on the demand side? Because demand side is about people, right? It's not so much about technology, it's about people, and it's about livelihoods and economies. And, you know, I think that's something that's really important to think about those issues when we put the demand and supply together. You know, it's about development, and that's such an important topic. So thank you, Fiona. Xiang, could I come to you now? I know we're so lucky to have two people here from China, because China is obviously at the forefront globally of planning for a low carbon future. So if you could share some of your wisdom with us, that would be great. Over to you.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I work for the Energy Authority of China, namely National Energy Administration. And I joined this administration in 2010. So I have been involved in the drafting, implementation, or final evaluation of 4 consecutive 5-year plan of China's energy sector. So I'm very pleased to provide you some Chinese experience and approaches in this energy planning process. Many of you might aware that China has the 5-year plan for to lay out by the Chinese government. It's a very vital instrument, I would say, to guiding the development, allocate public resources, and attract private investment, or lay out major project, or shaping relevant policies. So that has this basic function. Actually, China is a country that values planning very much and excels at it. To date, China already have like 14 consecutive 5-year plans about the social and economic development. These plans sets clear strategic direction, and it can break down our ambitious goals into small, manageable targets, and then we work step by step to achieve that. Actually, energy planning is an integral part of China's planning system. Over the past decades, while ensuring the energy demand, China is actively promoting the energy, low carbon, and green transition. Actually, in the opening remarks, I think everybody are already aware. In the morning, China's wind and solar power capacity has experienced tenfold in the last decades, and for 3 consecutive years, China contributed for more than half of the installed capacity of wind and solar globally. So I think that's has close link to the formulation and execution of our energy plan. China's energy plan is not only guiding our high quality development, also injecting certainty or momentum to the global energy development and transition. So let's talk about how to make these plans and implement it. When we make plans, we not only look at the current trends, we also focus on long-term goals. And more importantly, we emphasize the effectiveness of plan implementation. So first, in formulating these plans, we adopt both top-down and bottom-up approaches to ensure we make reasonable and feasible energy planning targets and align national goals with local objectives in the energy sector. And we also we use multiple strategic methods, including expert consultation and in-depth research and investigation, as well as a wide range of inputs from other ministries, stakeholders, and institutions. During the implementation, we set clear annual target, issue annual guiding documents in the energy sector, and conduct comprehensive annual review to ensure the effective execution of this plan. And at the middle term and the final stage of the plan, we evaluate the progress. We review and summarize the plan's implementation. The funding are crucial inputs for the formulation of the next plan, next cycle. So ensuring the continuity and a coherence between the successive 5-year plans. But China still is a developing country, so its energy development is obligated to support the economic and social progress effectively. But at the same time, in pursuing Chinese modernization, we remain committed to building on ecological civilization. We pledge green development goals, namely carbon peaking by 2030, carbon neutrality by 2060. Therefore, our energy planning has two focus on the demand side, meeting the growing energy consumption needs driven by the economic and social progress, and on the supply side, transition to a low carbon, a new energy system that is low carbon, clean, safe, and efficient. 2025, this year, marks the final year of China's 14th 5-year plan. And it's a crucial time for the drafting of the 5th plan. The 15th plan, the period from 2016 next year, 2026 to 2030, that's a crucial time for us to construction the so-called new energy system, as well as our delivering on our commitment of peak our carbon emission by 2030. So as a leading energy planner, the National Energy Administration are now actively assessing the current plan, the implementation of the current plan, and initiating research for the next cycle. So we welcome your continued interest on our China's planning progress. And that concludes my intervention. I'm happy to take the question for the participants and share more about Chinese experience.
Thank you very much. That's excellent and somewhat awe-inspiring as well. And just to hear about the kinds of coordination you're talking about is particularly interesting, and I'm sure we'll come back to that in a minute. Marina, could I ask you to go next? We're going to go all the way to the other side of the world now and hear about experiences from Latin America. And I think it should be on. Try.
Hi. Yeah, now it's on. Thank you very much for inviting us to this session, for sharing Latin American perspective of demand-side energy planning. So, as I have been introduced, I I am Marina Hill. I am currently in charge of the energy unit within the Natural Resources Division of the UN ECLAC, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations. I have to say that although our entity is not fully dedicated to energy, the institution has been supporting countries with technical advisory services to develop energy policies for decades. Now we still support the countries of our region with different energy issues, from technical assistance, capacity building, developing of documents, generating knowledge, but also providing the both technical and political platforms for exchanging best practices and for having this dialogue between countries. And in this regard, we have at the regional level the Regional Forum on Energy Planners, which is called FOREPLAN by its acronym in Spanish. ECLAC has been leading this regional forum on energy planners since 2018. And at the beginning, it was a forum to exchange methodologies, best practices, share experiences between countries. We accompany a lot of countries in their long-term energy scenarios, constructions, and so on. And now this forum has become also, apart from the platform, in a source of technical advisory services and also capacity building upon demand of the countries. We see a lot of issues regarding energy planning, and to focus in the demand side issue that brings us together today. From our perspective, I have to say that Latin America and the Caribbean countries have made a lot of progress in their long-term energy scenarios, but most of them still focus on the supply side by expanding the capacity and diversifying energy sources on their mixes. But there's still some examples from the region that are also incorporating demand-side measures in their energy planning scenarios and processes by introducing factors of energy efficiency and also electrification of key sectors. Some examples of these are Brazil, Chile, and Colombia. In the case, to share more in a little bit of detail of these examples, the case of Brazil, they have incorporated demand response scenarios, especially in distributed generation, which is really important for this country. They have a 10-year energy plan where they consider batteries and pumped storage hydroelectric plants to provide flexibility and demand response services, and they introduce these measures into their energy planning. In the case of Chile, they are most focused in integrated impact management systems. They focus on large consumers and as well as energy efficiency measures for the industrial, transportation, and residential sector. They introduce these variables into their modeling and planning processes. And the last example of this kind of exercises is Colombia, which is also incorporating demand management measures, especially regarding climate change and mining and energy sectors. They have like five main strategic lines, or I don't know how to say, but they emphasize energy efficiency and demand management, and they also introduce these two into their energy modeling. From these three examples of the region and with our experience in talking and exchanging with our countries, I would like to group the measures that have been taken into account in the region in 3 large groups. The first is electrification of end users. The second, energy efficiency, and the third, energy communities, which is also linked to what you said on that demand side is about people. And I don't know if I have time now or I will expand a little bit more. Yeah, so regarding electrification of end users, our region, as most of the regions of the world, consumes the majority of the energy in the transportation sector and the industry. The transportation sector accounts for 39% of the total consumption, and it is almost entirely based on non-renewables. And the industry accounts for the 26% of the total consumption. So some countries that have made progress in electrification of end users, in transport with electromobility or residential heating or industrial processes are Chile, Brazil, Mexico, Uruguay, and Argentina. Chile is focused on its mining industry, which consumes a lot of energy in the country. Brazil has made efforts and advancements in the agricultural and food industries. Mexico in their car and manufacturing industry, and so on. So, with regard to the second large group that I mentioned, the energy efficiency in the region, we are about to publish a document on sectoral energy efficiency in the region, and we see some, I want to bring 2 main messages. The first one is that energy intensity of GDP in Latin America and the Caribbean has decreased, but and it is one of the lowest of the world, but it is not reflecting an efficiency gain, but rather than that, it is not capturing the market barriers and the low access to efficient energy technologies that the households, especially the low-income households, have. And examples of countries that have made progress in energy efficiency are again Brazil and Mexico. Some countries are repeated, but here we have another example of the Eastern Caribbean that has been supported by IDB and CARICOM to advance in energy efficiency in their countries. And finally, the last issue on energy communities and citizen participation, although it is more or less new in the region, it is a big effort that countries are doing to manage demand side of the planning. And some examples that I would like to highlight here is the case of Colombia, where they have these energy communities programs where users can generate, sell, or use efficiently their energy. And also Chile and Brazil are also making some advances to move towards this kind of programs. But still, there is challenges in our region to incorporate these kind of measures into the energy planning, and also to move forward the implementation as well of these measures. So,
great.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic, and it's I'm glad you talked a bit about energy efficiency there. Maybe I didn't talk about that enough earlier on. Okay, so we have one more panelist, and it's over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. I'm Gong from State Grid Energy Research Institute of China, and I am very honored to speak here. As we all know, in the process of energy transition, demand side trends remain controlled to renewable growth. Analyzing past and future demand side, it isn't just about learning from history. it's the foundation for achieving carbon neutrality and shaping policies, technological and markets. Let me start with China's recent demand, electricity demand. From 2022 to 2024, consumption grew rapidly, reaching nearly to 10 TWh in 2024, with a 7% annual increase, even faster than China's 5% in economic growth. This surge was driven largely by industry, which contributed to almost half of the growth, fueled by booming production of PV, EVs, and batteries. Looking ahead, China's power demand remains strong, and China's electrification rate is expected to reach about 13% by 2025. As building, industries, and transportation increasingly rely on clean electricity to cut carbon emissions, power demand will grow significantly. Longer time, technological advance, industrial development, and changing consumption patterns will drive rapid growth in electricity loads, particularly data centers, EVs, and renewable hydrogen production. These new demand sources will reshape power and economic relationship and create both challenges and opportunities for power system planning and operation. In China, we have developed a smarter way to predict electricity needs by studying each region and industry separately. In other words, we use traditional statistical methods in old school sectors, but for these faster growing new industries, we identify what's actually driving their power needs and where they are hiding. And geography matters. Because you can't predict household electricity needs use the same way in Beijing as you would in Sichuan province, because people's energy habits vary wildly by region. In the future, we're looking forward to explore more innovative approaches in demand side forecasting and management with global partners. Thank you. That's all.
Very nice. Thank you very much. So I have a few questions to ask the panel now. So I'm going to just do a couple of them, but we've also got a lot of questions coming in here from the Slido system, and I promise we're going to get to those. And I can see you're upvoting the ones you like. We'll try and get to those as soon as we can. But let me maybe start with a couple of broader questions. Fiona, maybe I can start with you. You talked about sort of bringing sort of the human dimension into thinking about demand. Can you say something about how these sort of participatory methods, have you got any thoughts on how they can be sort of integrated into the planning process?
I had a feeling you'd ask something like that. So Charlie and I talk a lot about...
That's a tough question.
We talk a lot about methods and have these classic qual-quant discussions all the time, which is quite fun. But a really, really good question. I often get the question, when you're doing this very local, granular work, how can that ever be scalable? How can it ever be sort of mainstreamed or scaled up? And I guess there's no easy answer to that, but I would push back a little bit and talk about how we've become really, really good at building capacity, technical capacity in, for example, low and middle income countries when it comes to designing energy systems. And it's been, you know, really given a platform, and that sort of technical know-how is really, it's supported, I think, quite often, where the social and socio-economic expertise and the sorts of methods that you need to get at that are not as prominent or given as much funding or space or capacity. So I think there's a role for perhaps development partners in the kinds of contexts where I'm working to be more targeted in how they fund local capacity building to be able to do that kind of granular work with communities and to be able to scale it out. So that's more about building capability and capacity in governments, in regulatory authorities. They have models for designing, for example, decentralized mini-grid systems, like I was saying before, but they're very static, and they focus quite a lot on predicting demand, predicting willingness to pay, population growth, and so on. But I think we could be boosting capacity in the softer, if you want to call it that, skills around social science and political economy approaches to understanding what's going to happen in these energy systems going forward.
Good answer, thank you. And maybe as like a segue, Xiang, if I could turn to you. When I gave my sort of opening remarks, you know, I was giving a big long list of why this is so difficult and how it's so difficult to get the coordination between the different ministries, between the different stakeholders. And you kind of outlined, I guess, how there's sort of the planning process in China has sort of addressed some of those. But I wonder if you could just expand on that a little bit and talk about, you know, just like in a sort of very practical way, how would you actually coordinate the sort of the top down and the bottom up? How do you resolve, you know, sometimes if you're having problems meeting the target numbers, what's the sort of process by which that gets resolved? Is there any additional light you can shine on that?
Thank you for your question. That's a good question. I have introduced that like for a developing country, we have long-term goals. Like I can say we have one central goal for when People's Republic of China founding 100 years in 2050, we will achieve a modernized, prosperous socialism country in that time. So we have to, this is a long-term goal. We have to break it down into manageable targets, into small pieces. So basically, we already have a top priority over there. But the local government have their own development objectives. And the stakeholders, industry, the enterprises have their goals to make money. So in that case, we need top-down. We have target. We should support the overall goal, but we want to make an objective reasonable and feasible. So just top down is not that case. So we need bottom up. We need to listen to the stakeholders. So that's a very intensive consultation, and we do annually target, annually review, and we do middle-term review and final evaluation to make our long-term goals to be achieved step by step. So that's basically that case. I remember during our discussion before the panel, I'm encouraged to speak out, agree or disagree with the panels or with your presentation. So I will speak one agree and one disagree with your presentation. I disagree that you said in the past, the demand is easy to predict because the growth is low and stable. Actually, in China, it's not the case because China growing very fast during the past few years. And our energy sector, I think it's increasingly growth in the renewable energy sector. So that's one disagree. But I do agree that we should take the interaction between demand side and supply side into consideration, the interaction between these two sides. And I will provide you a Chinese experience. let's talk about the EV. And in few years ago, people actually in China hastened to purchase EV. And the government offers some financial incentives to consumer, but it doesn't work well because the charging problem is a really big problem. People are worried where can I charge, or if my car will out of power unexpected. So we call it charging anxiety. So that scares the buyers away from purchase EV. So in the 14th five-year plan, we upgrade our power systems and launched a massive effort to expand EV charging infrastructure. We focus on those spots, like the people where they live and work, and the business areas, factories, the place where people go for fun, and highways as well. Especially make sure the charge are there when the busy holidays. And rural areas as well, because China has many people living in the rural area. We are deploying more chargers over there too. Step by step, we're building a truly convenient charging network. We also try to collect, we also try to collect the EVs to the grade better by using price signal to promote smart and orderly charging. So, and it's really working well. By last month, by April 2005, over 14 million charging facilities are installed nationwide, and about 40 million of those are public chargers. You can find chargers at almost every expressway area, service areas. While the charging barrier effectively addressed, the EV are booming. And they are now the top sellers in China, over 1 million new sales every month in China. So there are almost 36 million new energy vehicles in China, and of which around 25 million are purely fully electric. So the point is, planning and building the right energy infrastructure didn't just meet the demand of EV, it actually helps make EV more popular and paves the way for the increasing growth of this industry. So that's a good interaction between the demand side and the supply side.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I completely agree with you. And it was probably foolish of me to have talked about slow growth. And anything you can say about the world, China is most certainly going to be an exception, right? So you were quite right to call me out on that. Very interesting, and I'm very struck also by kind of the idea of that planning. Maybe in the West we sort of tend to sort of think of planning is all about, can you make the right model? Can you predict what's going to happen in the future? It's sort of forward-looking but rather fatalistic. And you've described this where planning is as much about the process as it is about the modeling. It's about the consultation and the coordination and the having the plans and adjusting the plans. It's what the West is starting to call sort of monitoring and verification, but it's sort of something that's much more sort of baked into the thinking, I think, in China. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about that. Thank you very much. Marina, if I could ask you now, it was very interesting to hear you talk about sort of a lot of these sort of new sort of demand side sort of measures that are being put in place in Latin America. But it seems like sort of the world in general is still sort of struggling to think about how to sort of integrate that into the planning process. And it seems like, would you care to reflect on that? To what extent are sort of these processes being reflected in the plans?
Yes, thank you for your question. And I would like first to build up a little bit on what you recently talked on participatory processes. And I would link this with the second question, because we recently conducted a survey to the countries of the region to determine their planning capacities, either institutional, technical, and how they do the planning processes and so on. And regarding the participatory processes, we realized that most of our countries do have participatory processes along all their planning schedule, but most of them focus on the dissemination part of the process, where scenarios are already made and they share it with the society and so on. But a little few made or include participatory processes within the construction of their scenarios. But the good thing is that the ones that do that, they do for consulting on the uncertain, with the fact, they do the participatory process to consult on the factors of uncertainty that are introduced into the model. So this is a good thing that could be used to foster more demand-side scenarios with uncertainty and so on. And how the countries are integrating the demand-side scenarios into their planning. I'm sorry, this is a few countries that do so. As I said in the first part of my speech, and they do Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, and they have a strong institutional, as we realize also with the survey that we conduct, they have a strong institutional capacity and base to do planning, both the three countries, Colombia, Chile, and Brazil. We can say that they are the three most advanced in energy planning in the region. So, and they have also a large human resources to do the planning. So they introduce this, they look into the measures that the country are putting in place in their policies, and they introduce factors such as energy efficiency, levels of consumption of different sectors of the economy and so on. So they do this like that. Thank you.
I'm so glad you raised that topic there, because obviously, well, I've already been guilty of a lot of sweeping generalizations here, and people are always telling me I do that. So, but this, you know, how the different needs in different countries, and the sort of, you know, how vital capacity building is, and I think you can see it certainly from the example of China about, you know, the expertise in planning hasn't come about by accident, right? It's come about through decades and decades of investing in the institutional capacity to be able to do that kind of stuff. And you know, and obviously Brazil, Colombia are very different from the smaller Caribbean countries, for example. We've been working there recently, and you know, I would say we're just scratching the surface of the amount of sort of institutional capacity building that needs to be done. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. Thank you very much. And that's, you know, maybe instead of worrying about the algorithms and the models, we need to be focusing on those issues much more. But having said that, if I could turn to you now, Yichun, Gong, because you hinted a little bit about sort of these different modeling approaches, and you were mentioning different methods, like top-down methods and bottom-up methods. Could you just say, without getting too technical, could you maybe say a little bit more about the kinds of methods that you use when you're using your planning?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your question. I want to share that I think there are 3 key points to better forecast future energy demand. First, I think it is specialized research by sector to build a multi-dimensional analysis framework considering industry trends, technological evolution, and policy director. Second, detailed load profiling. such as creating load characteristic maps and dynamic industry databases to quantify flexible and shifting potential. Third, market-based approaches, including innovative pricing tiers and virtual power plants to integrate these laws into electricity market. That's the 3 points is my recommend.
Thank you very much. That's great. So I think we've still got a few minutes left here. We've got 15 minutes left. So I would like to turn now to the interventions and the questions that we've had from Slido. Slido. So the first one, which seems to have got a lot of attention here, is, and I'm just going to ask you who wants to take this, but it's quite a provocative one. Well, it says can or can't AI predict the demand of tomorrow for you? And I think we have a few variations on that one. So who would like to give us their expertise on AI? It's certainly not me.
Okay, I would like to take this opportunity. Actually, we are policymakers, and we introduce a top-down, bottom-up. Actually, my colleagues from the state-grade energy institutions, they provide us many technical support. Like in the AI development, I think I learned from our institutions in China that different types of computing power exhibits various loading characteristics. Like for the data center that are driven primarily by general purpose or high performance computing, typically share similar loading features with the traditional high energy consumption nodes. And these include relatively high predictability of demand, high annual utilization hours, and overall stability of this loading curve. But in contrast, data centers that focus on intelligent computing like AI, their demand more complex, and their loading characteristics are very complex. Their electricity demand is significantly influenced by workloads and the temperature, the outside temperature. So result in distinguished diurnal or seasonal loading curve. And so that's make their loading behavior more difficult to forecast. So currently, actually in China, there is a regional imbalance in the distribution of computing resources. In the Eastern China has very strong demand for Eastern China has very strong demand, but faces like the constraints in climate condition and energy availability and land resources. But in the Western China has abundant wind and solar resources and plenty of land and the favorable climate, but weak computer demand. So to address this imbalance, in 2023, we have released a series of key policies. I have 2 examples. One is action plan for the high quality development of the computing infrastructure. And the other is the implementation guideline on deepening the Eastern data, Western computing projects to accelerate the establishment of a national integrated computing power network. This document emphasizes 3 points. Number 1, coordinate deployment of computing power across Eastern, Central, and Western China, and the integration of large-scale wind and solar power bases with national computing hubs. And the third is optimizing of the data center site selection and development strategies. So by relocating the data centers to the Western region, we can fully leverage its inherent advantage in climate, energy, and land. This shift not only facilitates local and proximate consumption of renewable energy, but also promotes the synergistic development of data, computing, and green electricities. So in doing so, we aim to driving the green, low carbon, and sustainable development of data center and AI technologies.
Fascinating, thank you. I didn't know about that. I know it's been a long-standing challenge for China to sort of have a lot of the resources in the West and a lot of the demand in the East, and I didn't know it also applied to issues around AI. It's fascinating. I'm not sure that we entirely have answered the question there about can AI predict demand. I think we maybe did that backwards there and can we predict the demand of AI? But I think maybe on that question, maybe I'll refer you all back to what I said before. You know, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. But and you know, maybe AI is good for forecasting, but I'm not sure that AI has a role in telling us what our vision of our energy system should be in the future. So maybe that's one way to think about that question. Now let's see, we have another question here, which I think is very interesting, which is, and I think Fiona, you touched on this a little bit already, but I'm going to push you to say a bit more, which is, how do we mainstream justice in planning supply to meet demand? So it's sort of, again, the question is maybe coming a bit from the supply side, and I kind of think that one of the reasons I'm so interested in demand is that, you know, that is a lot of where the environmental justice questions come up. But could you say a bit more about that, Fiona?
Yes, I can try. And someone has noted the conflict in DRC and the suffering that happens there. So that's a really tricky case, I would say. But I've been reading about just the upsurge in renewable energy projects all over the world, and the enormous number that are ending up in courts or ending up being held up because of poor consultation and poor engagement with local communities. So it really adds enormous costs to energy developers to end up in a situation where you're in a conflict with a community because of a perceived injustice. So I would say there's a huge incentive for energy companies to do this properly and to have good engagement, which, going back to participatory, genuine participation with local communities, not just ticking a box and getting communities to go along with what you're going to do anyway, but genuine participation and ideally ownership, and in the best case scenario, situations where communities actually stand to gain something financially from being a part of these projects. So that's the only way, really, the clearest incentive I see for private sectors and governments to do something on justice in new renewable energy planning.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I can say from our perspective that, you know, one of the things we've been trying to do with our modelling work is that, you know, quite often some of these EJ questions aren't kind of in the remit of the planners. So we've tended to try and sort of nudge those questions into the planning process by, you know, making our modelling tools more able to address some of those things. For example, looking at sort of health impacts of air pollution and what benefits you get by switching to, you know, a more integrated planning approach and more renewables. But I will say, it's hard to do that, and I think it's particularly hard when those issues like are transboundary and they, you know, so, you know, the demand for rare earth, well, generally the demand for materials needed for storage. You know, the impacts are very far away from where the storage is being built. And I'm sure that, Marina, I can ask you to say something about that. You know, Chile in particular has huge resources for lithium. Is that an issue that in Latin America is being grappled with in terms of, you know, how energy planning going on in the rest of the world will have an impact in Latin America? I'm sorry if that's a bit of a muddled question.
Yeah, it is a difficult question, but of course our region, as it is the most renewable region of the world right now, it is concerned about world demand, of course. And also regarding the planning and where the resources are, we have also a challenge similar to what they were saying in China, because most of the resources for renewable generation are located also far away from the centers that where they are consumed. For example, wind and water are in the south of South America. Solar PV is in the desert where no cities, with no closed cities. So it is a concern, especially to bring the investment to do transmission, for sure. And this is a huge challenge for the region, because if we have to support global demand, infrastructure and investment in infrastructure is crucial for us.
Great, thank you very much. And I think we're rapidly running out of time, but I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to try and merge these two questions that we have here. One about the role of decentralized electricity infrastructure, but also maybe if people could reflect more generally on just sort of changing the narrative, or I suppose the question is, do you think we need to change the narrative about demand-side management? How do we, we've been talking about demand. Do we see a future in 10 years' time where that will have taken care of itself, or are there things we need to do to put demand planning more at the forefront of overall planning? Who would like to take that one? That's a difficult question. Xiang, can I? No one. Xiang, can.
I'm trying to stand with the challenging question. In China, actually, we introduced last year. We installed 370 new gigawatt of new solar and wind power. Many of them are distributed energies. Because we have a very large territory and many people live in the rural areas, so in order to improve the livelihood there, so actually we combine with the development of local renewable energy and the poverty alleviation and the ecological system conservation. We have a perfect example happening in the Qinghai province, located in the northwest of China, where the population is very small, but the territory is very large, and almost the climate is almost like Gobi. It's dry, like not as dry as desert, but the surface without any, just very little grassland, but but they have very abundant solar power resources. So like 10 years before, that place we developed the solar power panel. But after 10 years, we found that under the panel, the grass growing gradually, because the deployment of solar panel changes the small climate there, because there are some water during the night just drop down from the panel and make this land growing grass. And the local people farming their sheep under the panel. So we find a very interesting and a very lovely situation there. On the surface of the panel, we generate electricity. Under the panels, we have this sheep farming, and the income of this household, of these farmers, increased. So at that place, these three things combine together. So we found that maybe the renewable energy that's just provide green electricity, it will improve the ecological system there. So now we have further investigation and analysis cooperative with IRENA to dig out more about it. Maybe we can apply this very good pattern elsewhere in the world. So that's the power of this new solutions. So.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, we could have a whole separate panel on agrovoltaics. It's and sheep as well. It's just a very, very interesting, promising area, I think. And I think we're almost out of time now. And I was just wondering if did anyone have a burning remark that they wanted to get off their chest before I wrap it up? Fiona, looks like you do.
It's not to add anything of value, but more to say I really like that example. And I was trying to formulate something to that question as well, but it really demonstrates how you bring these different things together. And too often energy is in a silo. People don't really see and visualize and understand the connections between energy and everything else. And we write it in every report we write. You need energy for all the other development goals, but that really just illustrates it so perfectly. So thank you.
Go ahead, Marina.
Just a quick intervention, because I was also thinking in how to answer that question and how to bring the new narrative of the demand side to the countries. And also, listening to the example, I was thinking that bringing inspiring examples to the forums that we have to the countries will maybe have an impact to change this narrative and to get the look of the countries into this new narrative of demand side.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I want to share that as everything goes digital and AI takes over data center and their electricity needs are shooting up like a rocket. We need completely new ways to protect energy needs. At the same time, in China, the most important thing is ensuring reliable electricity supply for the people. Building on this foundation, we must enhance the power system's flexibility through all available means, such as using energy storage technologies. And we will do better in the future. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much. And I'm afraid we're almost out of time here, so thank you for all your questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. I hope we got to most of the ones that we got to see on the screen, but I suspect there's a whole bunch lower down on the screen that we didn't see. So thank you for all your questions. If you would like to come and talk to the panel, I'm sure they will be around and love to engage with you, so please come up afterwards and talk to them. So it only remains for me to thank our wonderful panel for their great insights. And I'm going to hand it back to Moderator now. So thank you, everyone. And can we have a big round of applause for the panel?
Thank you very much. That really was a wonderful panel. And I have to say, I love the idea of sharing inspirational ideas to change people's thinking. I think that's incredibly powerful. At this point, we'll draw this session to the close. Now we've got coffee out in the dome. And if you could be back for the next session at 3:30, that would be great. The next session here in the blue stream is Connecting the Dots, Bridging Infrastructure Gaps for Renewable Powered Systems. And if you're interested in bottom-up solutions, bottom-up solutions energy communities, yes, finished it, that's in the Kammerherr Grand. So I'll see you in half an hour. Thanks again.